So what did you think of the depiction of Andrew Morton's book in The Crown Season 5, Episode 2?
Oh, I think it's pretty accurate. You know, like the Crown will take liberties with when things occur, but it is true that Diana was friends with a doctor named James Colthurst. He eventually became the go-between between her and Andrew Morton, that he literally rode his bicycle with like stuff smuggled into the basket in and out of Kensington Palace to her apartments so that he could bring in material and bring out tapes. And it is true that she fully complied with the book. You can see it in newspaper headlines, but basically she then publicly claims she had nothing to do with the book. So she just outright lies, denies. But everybody within the palace knows it must have been her, so nobody falls for it. And that's part of why you can see that she is able and willing to do things with the press that Buckingham Palace is not willing quite to do. I mean, they definitely have their own spin machine and lie outright as well about being sources, but this is awfully close to the center. This isn't even her sending out a friend to say this. There's a lot of detailed back and forth about how she made the book and what the reaction was, how she had to throw some of her friends publicly under the bus by saying, I didn't authorize them to speak. You know, like it's a pretty damaging thing when it goes off as a bomb.
Like she in fact did authorize some friends to speak, and then she had to then come out and say, no, they were going rogue and I didn't authorize,
right.
You know, in order to save face for herself. But then she would do
these like coy things like go to somebody's house who's her friend who she has thrown under the bus and then tip off the reporters that she's going to be there so she can be photographed walking into their house, which is like a tacit endorsement. It's just levels and levels of mind games.
Something that's very interesting, I find, is when famous people die, journalists consider anything that was off the record, like that, those agreements no longer hold. Which I've been kind of astonished to see in the Twitter age where, like, I remember when Steve Jobs died, people would be like, okay, well, all the stuff I said I wouldn't talk about with Steve Jobs, I can now tweet about. And it's like, okay, like, that feels a little weird to me, you know? Like, yes, that person is dead, but, like, you made an agreement and there's stuff they probably didn't want out into the world. Whatever the case is, I'm saying it's standard practice that journalists consider off-the-record agreements no longer binding after someone dies.
I mean, it's pretty brutal. So he does write a version of the book in which he protects her confidentiality as a source. And then it's like 91, 92. This book is a huge bestseller. It has incendiary things in it about her eating disorder, how she was treated, this horrible suggestion that she threw herself down the stairs at Sandringham while pregnant in a somewhat suicide attempt, like really awful, searing stuff. And then he makes many millions of dollars as a result. And he had been actually sort of plucked from relative anonymity. He wasn't like the, you know, top of the pile of British royals reporters or anything. He then, like the minute she dies in such a spectacular fashion, I mean, spoilers for real life, I think everyone knows that Princess Diana passed away, but that's only 5 years later. He immediately releases the book again, and instead of it being called Diana, Her True Story, I think it's Diana, Her True Story in Her Own Words or something like that, and he appends at the beginning transcripts of all of the tapes. So it becomes really clear that she had been lying the whole time about not participating. And I think
it's kind of a character assassination in some ways, even though she has passed away. And, you know, one could argue that you can't character assassinate someone who is no longer with us.
Well, but at the time, she's also, it's like candle in the wind, right? Like she's the most beloved person. So the fact that she had lied also, the fact of her participation is also part of the story. Look, I mean, she really did do it. And maybe she or her estate could take the lumps for having done it. But it is certainly if legal. I don't know if it's ethical, and it's certainly in poor taste for me. This is going to sound like a criticism. This is a book with an agenda. She's at this point still married. She has not even gotten separated yet, and she is desperately seeking a way out of this marriage. She has basically been told over and over that your only path forward is to shut up, go have an affair, or find happiness, or take up carriage racing or whatever somewhere else, and do it quietly, and accept specifically that Camilla is just going to be part of the picture. There's nothing you can do about that. You're not getting Charles back, or to the extent you can, it's really not under your control. It'll be if he decides to come back to you. Given that it's with an agenda, which I mean, of course, if you go through these lengths. Of course, you have a goal. And that she's a very damaged and fragile person. I think in some ways, I think it's exploitative or self-exploit. You know, like it's not a person who's like in a good state. I think if you are interested in diving further into this question, Tina Brown has written 2 books, one of which is called The Diana Chronicles and the other is called The Palace Papers. And both of them go over, you know, there are things in the book, like the Sandringham thing, Tina Brown firmly pushes back and says it's actually not true. Like it didn't happen. She might have fallen, but you know, like that maybe you could, in the most generous reading to Diana, believe that she thought that that happened, you know? So I think it's best to take it not exactly as a grain of salt, but more like not as, you know, it is a perspective and nobody has an ironclad version of quote unquote the truth.
Thanks for watching that video. That was a clip from the Decoding TV podcast. To hear the full episode, go to podcast.decodingtv.com, or I will leave a link to that episode in the description below. You can also support this podcast by becoming a member at decodingtv.com. And also, like, subscribe, hit that bell icon. You know the drill. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.